Greetings again from Japan, where it is now snowing. It snows a lot here, and that's why the skiing is so good. It's like every morning, fresh powder, lots and lots of it. So we've got part 2 of our interview with Neal Bawa today. Very, very smart guy with some great insights. Again, we believe the same thing as far as the demographic cliff. I just believe it's quite a bit further out than he thinks. But listen to both sides and see what you think. Before we get into that, though, I want to give you an update from our friend Mike at Altos. And, I could paraphrase this, but I think it's better that you hear it right from him. Because, again, this market is surprising some people. It is not surprising me, but it is surprising some people who thought there was going to be some huge real estate crash, and they are so darn disappointed. And I think they're going to continue to be disappointed, but we'll see what happens. So if you are watching on video, you'll see the chart that he is talking about. If not, it's pretty simple to understand. But if you are watching on video, you'll also see this gorgeous view behind me of the gently falling snow as we dive into this topic. So here we go. Let's listen in just for a minute or two on what Mike says. Then we'll get to the second part of our interview with Neal.
Available inventory of homes for sale declined by another 1.8% this week to 457,000. It's not totally unheard of for inventory this early in the year to creep down for a few weeks. This year's change, though, is notable because inventory was rising so unusually fast in September, October, and even into November. If you're only watching the headlines, or if you like to watch like the real estate crash YouTubers, you'd be expecting now for inventory to be climbing each week. And it's simply not happening. Inventory across the country is declining because we have more buyers and sellers. The fact is we have very few sellers right now. And this trend doesn't seem poised to change direction either. So if mortgage rates stay roughly in the low sixes, we now expect inventory to keep declining for each week through February, it seems likely. Notice in this chart here, each of the last 2 years, inventory kept declining with that insatiable pandemic demand through February and even into March. You can see February 2021 here, I've highlighted where 354,000 homes on the market. And then there was still 8 weeks before the bottom of the inventory curve in 2021. But before the pandemic, see, for example, 2019 in this chart, I've highlighted here 816,000 homes on the market in February 2019. Inventory was already at its low point for the year in early February. And you can see the curve had already bottomed out and was getting ready to climb for the spring home buying season. So the last 2 years have been the exception, but it sure looks like this year will be more like the last 2 years than the pre-pandemic normal. Meaning inventory looks to keep declining for several more weeks at least.
So there you have it, folks. Again, no surprise to me. We are seeing a whole bunch of sellers who simply refuse to sell their homes. They refuse to put their properties on the market because they have such low mortgage rates. It is just a very different kind of environment now. And I thought you should just hear that. Inventory still extremely low, much lower than anybody could call even close to a normal market, much less a recessionary market, a bad market, a buyer's market. It is strictly a seller's market, and it remains so regardless of the detractors and the people who think there is going to be some big shift in the market. And again, from the beginning, I've just said that these people they're just wrong. There's just no evidence to support their views. Foreclosure rates extremely low, bankruptcy rates extremely low. Yes, there have been some layoffs, but those are, those are to be expected of these overfunded tech companies that really needed to lean up and, do a better job right sizing their companies. So we will see as it continues. But hey, I've got to grab some coffee and some breakfast and then get my ski gear on and hit the slopes, as we have some great powder here to take advantage of in Japan. So I will let you listen to Neal and I talk, and we have a very lively discussion here. I think you'll really enjoy the rest of this interview that we started on Monday. So here it is.
When we look at demographics and how sharply negative the US's demographics have turned so quickly, we know that by 2030, the housing shortage, the numbers that I see for the housing shortage today are fairly credible. They're not exactly right. They're a little bit like inflation. They're a little overstated. But when I see the numbers by 2030, I'm absolutely convinced they're overstated because they're not taking this demographic shift in mind. And so I think that the housing shortage ends sometime in the 2030s because we're going to have an aging population, a lower birth rate, and we'll finally have caught up with that lower birth rate. So I do not think technology fixes this. I think demographics have fixed it already. We're just waiting to catch up with demographics.
So that's interesting. And the only thing I would say to that is, see, I think the housing shortage ends in about 2045 to 2050. That's when the demographics really shift. Okay. The thing I would say, though, is you've got to include immigration, which the U.S. is one of the most open countries, most open to immigration of any, certainly any major country by far. And when you look at the compared to what question, right, and you look around the world and you look at how China's demographics are absolutely appalling. I mean, China is
horrific.
Over in 2030.
It's a time bomb.
Okay.
Yeah, they're finished.
In 2030, it's like the end of China, basically. I mean, it's not like the country's going to end.
This is peak China in 2022. This is peak China right now.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't agree more.
On this one, we disagree, and I'll tell you, why. I feel the fact that immigration is a politically hot topic, it hides the fact that immigration to the United States has been dropping, legal and illegal combined. So you got to combine those two numbers, right? So legal's been dropping sharper, illegal's been dropping slower. But if you look at actual immigration in the United States, it has been dropping. Now, it may plateau out this year because of the problems that we have on the southern border, but I bet you those are going to get fixed sooner or later. The Democrats will eventually wake up to the fact that they have to do something serious about this, and I think they're beginning to do that. The Republicans would say you should have done this 2 years ago, and they would be right. My point is that is a time-based problem that will be solved. Overall, immigration to the United States is down for one simple reason. There was always a party for it and a party against it. The truth is now the Democrats themselves are unwilling to put any kind of bills in the Senate or the House that increase immigration. And really that's what most countries are doing. 20 years from now, Germany, for example, is in deep doo-doo, so they're basically opening up immigration. So I don't think that the political will exists to change anything for the next decade or two. It really has to get very bad with corporations screaming saying we don't have any workers. I think that's a very long way away. So I don't think we do anything about immigration in the next 10 years because it's a political challenge. And I'm not seeing those numbers add up to the appalling reduction in our baby creation ability.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, if you want to have a country, you got to have children, folks. That's it. Just ask Japan, Russia, Germany, all the rest. I mean, if they don't have children, they're just it's over. I was kind of approaching the immigration issue from the other side. I would say that the immigration issue, there has not been as much pressure or as much need for foreigners to immigrate to the U.S. over the last, really since globalization took off, okay? Mm-hmm. Because life has gotten better around the world, much mm-hmm. better, in fact. About 500 million people have been pulled out of poverty and joined the middle class, to whatever middle class means in that given country. And so, life used to be much tougher in those countries and much nicer in the US. And now that gap has gotten smaller. So that
Almost
lessens.
everywhere. Yes,
Yeah,
and it's not just India and China. I mean, it's happened in across all of Asia and
yeah.
a significant portion of Africa. It's that has happened. So, but you're saying you think that's going to change? You think that this need for people to immigrate is going to flip around or reverse?
Well, I think that, like we talked about earlier when we talked about inflation affecting other countries more, and the US having the reserve currency and having it better than these other countries, I think as things continue to deteriorate, and I think they will overall continue to deteriorate, the only savior is technology
Hmm.
for everything. And, with the release of Chat GPT, a month and a half ago, I mean, that's like an amazing advance forward, possibly. I'd love to talk to you about that because, so you're nodding
Yeah,
your
the
head like
problem with
that's what
Chat
you're.
GPT again is we're yet to invent technology that moves physical things around.
Well,
Chat
let's go
GPT,
there in a second. Just hold that thought for a
yes.
second. The thing I wanted to say about the immigration thing is, I just think that that gap is going to maybe start widening again. And before we get to the tech component, which I'd love to talk to you about, Neal, because you're really in that much deeper than I am. But I want to bring to your attention an article that I has really changed my thinking a lot that I read back around 2005. And Jeremy Siegel was quoted in this article. And he said, and it was a really interesting thought that I'd never really thought about quite the way he said it. He said that with the rising middle class around the world, all of these people, as they now have disposable income, and keep in mind this article was 17 years old now, okay?
Sure.
He said, where are all the assets for these new entrants into the middle class? Where are the assets for them to buy? They're going to start looking around for assets. As soon as you are past survival and you have your needs met, you start thinking about, well, I better invest. I better do something with my money, right? And he talked about the looming asset shortage. And I thought that was really interesting. And then you fast forward from that just a few years, and a whole new asset class was created, cryptocurrencies. And I would argue that that's not really that much of an asset class, except for Bitcoin, which is in a class by itself. And I don't think it's going to succeed wildly because the governments and central banks aren't going to let it happen. It's their competition. But it is an interesting idea that, there's just much more of a need for assets. People have to, that money has to flow somewhere. And prosperity around the world has increased quite dramatically over the last 25 years.
Especially from a middle class perspective, right? So
Yeah.
I just spent time in three countries. So for winter I took I went to Indonesia, to Thailand, and to Singapore, and it was interesting to see that 2005 article to now 17 years
Yeah.
later. These people are investing in real estate in their own markets because
Yeah.
their ability to invest in real estate outside of their country is either legally restricted or just very difficult. So people are spending astonishing amounts of money on real estate. And I'll give you an example of this, right? We consider US real estate to be very expensive, blah, 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 it's too expensive, blah, blah, blah. US real estate as compared to our incomes, to
It's
our to
cheap.
our median income is cheap.
I agree.
Canada's more expensive, the UK is ridiculously expensive, Singapore is just astronomical, Japan's expensive. So developed economies,
Eastern
actually
Europe is
almost
more
all of
expensive
them,
than the
they're
US.
crazily
Yeah.
expensive, right? Now, do look at the fairly cheap economy, Thailand. People are earning on average $400 a month.
Hmm.
But when you go to the island of Phuket, they've got 2 million, 3 million,
Yeah.
4
Yeah.
million USD in properties, right?
Yeah.
So what's happening is that a significantly larger percentage of the money in these countries is going to real estate versus their stock market because their stock markets are so crazy. They're so up and down like Bitcoin. I mean, the stock
Hmm.
market of some of these third world countries resembles the level of fluctuation that you see in cryptocurrency, even though it's the actual stock market. So people don't trust it and they put money there. The Chinese are famous for putting everything into real estate. So I think that the assets are being built, but they're built in their country.
Yeah.
And yes, there's this feeling that somehow that money is going to end up in the United States. The truth is it is, but a tiny fraction.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Those assets require the same basic raw materials that are essentially demonetized because they're not attached to any one currency. Lumber is needed by every human on earth, and it's traded around the world, and it doesn't matter if it's a yen, a euro, a ruble, or whatever you're trading it in, it's still a piece of wood is worth what a piece of wood costs, right? I mean, look, as China has developed and caused all these shortages in steel, concrete, copper wire, it's pushed the worldwide price of those items up. So it makes those construction materials more expensive. It doesn't matter if a dollar never hits the US, all the materials got more expensive to build the house because
True,
of the demand in the other country.
but it's stopping. I mean, China is probably going to build 30% in the next decade of what it built in the previous decade. They built
I agree.
massive amounts. So China's now reached this extreme, stopping point, and because they were causing most of the inflation in world in steel and concrete and all these other materials, we actually catch a breather for about 7 or 8 years, and then a new hydra rears its head, and that's India, where I come from.
Right.
And India gets to the point where it says, okay, now we're going to suck up all of the available supply of everything in the world, and we're going to basically end up building 20 mega cities, 10 million people each, which is what China has finished doing.
Well, India is about to surpass China in population. I mean, India is the next
It
big
is,
thing,
but they're not quite ready,
right.
to be honest, to build these extraordinary mega cities that China has built. I mean, China builds a New York-sized city every 3 months.
Right. But
India builds
China-
one every 3 years.
China has an advantage. It's a communist country. India is a democracy, right? And say what you will about communism, but it can be efficient.
It can be very efficient when top-down communism.
Everybody has to move, and who cares about the environment? They can just
Exactly.
do whatever they want.
They get stuff done extraordinarily quickly. So I think that's why I think we'll catch a breather on the cost of everything for about 10 years before India gets to the point where their economy becomes efficient enough and large enough to basically suck all of that spare production out. So we're going to catch, a break there. The other thing that's happening is deglobalization. So the world is now fracturing again into sections. We're now becoming we used to be the free trade champion of the world. We're now a trade protectionist country. Right. And so as that happens, you're going to see trade more happen, inside of the continent. So Canada and Mexico, we're going to trade with them more. We're going to trade less with China. So I think that's going to insulate us from construction cost increases to some level.
But overall, that's inflationary.
That's inflationary because you have to basically build that infrastructure that you built in China. You have to now build it in Mexico or in Canada or in the U.S.
It with North American labor standards and environmental rules, which are much more expensive to comply with than anything in China.
But the truth is, I think, Jason, 10% of that is going to get built in the U.S. A lot of it is going to get built in Mexico because what we're seeing now is that you do not want this stuff to come 12,000 miles away, especially if the Chinese are going to attack Taiwan, because that'll lock up that entire area and there'll be no trade there for a year or two. I mean, these things take time. The Ukraine war is now 12 months old, and I'm not sure that we're in the second half of the war yet, and we might still be in the first half. Given that, I think that a lot of this stuff is going to end up getting built in Mexico. So one of the tips that I offer people is this. I mean, I study deglobalization or reglobalization or reshoring, whatever you want to call it, whatever the terms are. It's very clear that the easiest winner for real estate people to go after is Mexico. Luckily, there's only a few freeways that bring material from Mexico to the United States. Most of it will come by road. Very little of it is going to come by any other way. There's no waterways. Simply go and look at those freeways and look at the industrial towns along those freeways, not necessarily Dallas or Houston, but look at industrial towns like San Antonio and look at how their demand for industrial is going to skyrocket 10x, 20x, 30x, and then anything around that is going to get built up because essentially what's going to happen is stuff that now comes in, trillions of tons of stuff that comes in from our ports is going to come in from a set of freeways that we built with Mexico. Everything along those, Texas obviously the big beneficiary, is going to explode. The amount of this stuff is massive. I mean, there's several
So
hundred ships a day.
that's a big shift now. So when you think of the Pacific Rim and you look at the ports in LA and San Francisco area, and I mean,
New Jersey, yeah,
those are going to suffer, and a lot of that
massively.
traffic is going to be moved to trucking in the US. And if those trucks become self-driving, that's going to be more efficient too. So yeah,
I think they will, because what will happen is, I mean, self-driving for trucks is actually a much easier problem to solve
then for
mathematically
cars, yeah,
than for cars, especially if they're on fixed routes, right? So like for example, San Antonio down to not quite Mexico City, but some of their closer towns that are developing and exploding on their side is about 400 miles. So a Tesla truck, which has a 500-mile radius, could be programmed to run on that route back and forth continuously. Right? So you're not solving a complex mathematical problem. So
Right.
you're going to see an extraordinary amount of technology used to move stuff from Mexico to the southern border of the United States. Not necessarily move it beyond that. I think beyond that, it just becomes traditional trucking and traditional rail.
And the river network in the U.S. is pretty awesome. The only problem is it's
incredible.
So the levels are so low, you can't ship anything on the Mississippi at the moment. But
that's right. We need more rain. But still, I think even with the problems that we have, the United States has easily the world's best river trade system. No one else in the world even comes close to it. We have 13,000 miles of river, and I think we're going to start using it again because it'll start to make sense as we reshore, right? So as we reshore, we're not just reshoring from Mexico, we're also reshoring from Canada. I mean, you mentioned timber. What most Americans think that our timber comes from China. It doesn't. All of it comes from Canada.
Yeah,
it's Canadians that are basically sending us our lumber because it's too expensive to bring it in from China, and China's using all of their lumber. They're not really exporting anything.
Right. Good stuff. Well, Neal, I could talk to you forever, but we do have to wrap it up. But I want to give you a chance to talk about the technology thing that we sort of postponed that point because we did mention Chat GPT, and you apparently don't think this is that amazing. I think it's the prelude to passing the Turing test,
No, I don't. I think that general artificial intelligence is still decades away simply because of the nature of general artificial intelligence. I'm a technologist, so I understand what Chat GPT does.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it any less remarkable. It is truly astonishing, and we'll find not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of different applications, but it's only moving bits and bytes. And that restricts its usage. So I think that copywriters will go out of business, social media people will go out of business, right? So it's basically going to, over the next decade, and this will happen pretty quickly. Remember, only bits and bytes are involved, so the rollout is exponential in nature. It's not linear like it is with things that are heavy. So I think 10 years from now, it's going to eat up entire industries. It's going to be extremely dramatic. But I think that the challenge is this: technology was already doing a good job of taking some of these jobs away. So many of our copywriters, my copywriters, live in the Philippines. So what's really going to happen, a lot of people outside the US are going to lose their jobs, and a lot of people in the US are going to lose their jobs. So I think it's destructive in the sense that I think it is over a decade, $1 trillion technology, but there's other technologies out there that are 10 trillion or $100 trillion technologies that I think are bigger. So in the meantime, though,
care to mention one or two of those?
Well, I think that to me, this process of reindustrialization, this process of bringing all of our supply chains back to our own continent is going to be $100 trillion opportunity over 2 decades, simply because you cannot drive the numbers down. Technology only helps to a certain level, and we've already reached that tipping point where technology can't help with that as much anymore. So I think the dollar numbers there are massively, enormously larger. So I think that there's technologies there that are huge. The other one that is not a big one for this decade, but arguably is the largest for the next decade, is the implementation of true self-driving. So Tesla recently rolled out its beta to anyone that has a Tesla car, which
My
I
friend
was surprised to see.
for his Tesla,
Right.
$12,000.
And I don't think it's ready. I think it's. But if you look at technology exponentially, because it's not linear, it's exponential. Bits and bytes are exponential. When you forward move what Tesla's done with this technology in the last 5 years and move it forward 5 years, they will certainly get to the point where TAAS becomes a reality. TAAS is transportation as a service,
Yep.
where you basically, it's Uber, but
I
it's
call it
100 times
CAS,
better
car
than
as a
Uber,
service,
right?
but
So
yeah,
cars as a
right.
service, but essentially you get to the point where a newer generation than ours simply would feel stupid buying a car,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
they would simply share a car, just the way that they use Netflix. And we bought VCRs and DVD players, and they kind of laugh at that because they're sharing the internet. They're sharing the same bit, the same byte.
It's a
100 million
distributed
people are
network.
watching it.
Same
Exactly.
with cars. Yeah.
Cars will become a distributed network, and what will drive it is the green parties. The green parties will recognize that this is highly beneficial from a carbon benefit perspective. So they're going to create laws for it. They're going to basically subsidize it to the nth degree to make that possible. It also agrees with their political views of sharing everything, the somewhat socialist view that everything in the economy should be and must be shared, blah blah blah. So I think it
You'll own
appeals
nothing and
to
be happy.
it definitely appeals to the left greatly, and so they'll put money into it. So TAAS, I think, fundamentally changes the United States in one simple way. We built a freeway system in the 50s. Everything we did in real estate since then was based on that.
Yep.
If that changes, then everything changes. And also for real estate, 800 million parking lots become available for redevelopment a decade from now.
About 40% of any given city is dedicated to parking. So just think, if you can summon your car and there are cars all around, and you have a car in seconds.
Someone's car, not yours.
Well,
someone's
a
car.
Car. That's what I mean. And there's no need for parking because these cars never stop running, basically. They're like a Southwest plane. They keep going all the time. Yeah, that just changes everything. One of the market analysts I had on the show told me that parking garages are being built for easy conversion to office or residential. They're being built with 10-foot plates, and
Yes.
they're being designed so they can easily be converted because they know that's coming. The lessening need for the parking lot business would not be a recommendation. Okay.
I mean, it's just the gas business, the auto body collision business, and the parking business will not exist in 10 years. The insurance, the auto insurance business will not exist 10 years from now. All of these businesses will go out, and I can tell you we will have a real estate depression in this country for at least a decade because we will simply create an astonishingly large amount of land that we don't have access to today.
Right. But it's interesting to think, what could that land be used for? Like, you see, okay, there's some parking lots in a city, there's some parking on the street. I think it'll just make all these cities a lot nicer, without all
for
the
some
street
amount of
parking,
time,
and
right?
things like that. It'll just look a lot nicer. I don't know. It's sort of interesting because that also, if we're not building highways, we reduce the need for concrete and construction materials and construction workers and all those drivers that'll be laid off. I mean,
a TAAS network uses roughly 12% of the freeway systems of the US. It doesn't need to use the rest because cars can be within a few inches. Packing density. So when you do that, I mean, you're going to end up repurposing a significant portion of all freeways in the United States. And it's coming much faster because bits and bytes. Once again, cars have been turned into bits and bytes when it comes to the TAAS component, right? And Uber is a phenomenal example of how quickly this scales across the world. I went to 3 countries. They had their own Uber called Grab, so other companies are there. Grab was much more advanced than Uber. They did many more things. They had many more services. So the ability to digitize within a single decade is phenomenal. And again, this is in contrast with 3D printing, which you can't digitize as easily because there's physical material involved. But cars already exist, and upgrading a car to become, it's not that hard once you get the technology going. It's maybe a $2,000, $3,000 kit to retrofit an existing car to do that. And I'm sure Tesla will be selling truckloads of those kits if they end up being that company that succeeds. So I just feel like there is an absolute massive earthquake that shifts the real estate landscape 7, 8, 9 years from now.
Well, here's the other thing it does is that, the 3 primary rules of real estate have always been location, location, location. Is location that, I would always make the example of, what if you love to surf and you live in San Diego, California, right? Because you love to surf and you got to live in San Diego or Orange County or LA, right? Where the waves are. But then you think, well, I don't need my expensive multi-million-dollar house here anymore by the beach because I can just live inland. I can live in in Phoenix or, someplace inland. And every Friday evening, I can jump in my self-driving car at midnight and I can go to sleep and I can wake up at the beach and I can surf and it can drive me back that night after a day of surfing. So the location, think of what that does to high-end real estate that's value is driven by location. It lessens the value of it and increases the value of lower priced real estate, which is not being highly priced because of location. So it displaces that value equation.
Well, it allows us to use more of the US. I mean, the US only uses about 3 to 4% of our land. And we're landlocked because of the freeway system, because of this issue with traffic. All of a sudden, more of the U.S. becomes available. Basically, solves all future real estate zoning problems and land use problems, and in a decade from now. So I'm looking to get out of the real estate business in about 5 or 6 years.
That's interesting. I think you're a little early. That's where I disagree with you. I think you
We'll
ought to get out around 2040 or 2042. That's my opinion. But
Bits and bytes goes faster.
We can disagree with on that.
I think we agree on the principle.
Yeah. The one thing we will agree on is that software is eating the world. No question about that. Neal, give out a website or anything where you'd like people to find you.
Yeah, so I happen to be the only Neal Bawa on the web. So on the screen you see my name, Nealbawa. Just Google me. I talk about lots of things, technology, and then I talk about their impact on real estate. For example, we talked about climate change. Whether it's real or not, it's having an impact on real estate. And so we have those kinds of conversations. And the website that we store this information, 20 webinars a year, is Multifamily University. So just go in and type Multifamily University. Even though it's called that, we talk about all kinds of real estate, actually.
Good stuff. Neal, thanks so much for joining us. Really spirited discussion. I love it.
Loved it, Jason. This was amazing.